Sometimes I record a podcast interview with someone and I just know it is going to be so impactful. This conversation was just so needed. I feel we dive into so many topics, from Ryan's story of battles with eating disorders, autoimmune disorders, mental health issues, but we talk about so many nuanced topics, like some of the mindset issues that may set us back and some things that we're both dealing with currently on our own health journeys that may make us feel like frauds, or just things that we're going through in our own life, and these nuggets of wisdom that both Ryan and I share that I think will be so valuable to you as a listener. So my guest today, Ryan Brown, he is the co-host of the podcast Decentralized Radio, who 4 years ago was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called small fiber neuropathy. This came after years of recovering from a disordered eating pattern that left his body drastically weakened. This is how he overcame such struggles and how you can too. He's now an NTP like me, who's helping other autoimmune patients find remission through quantum health principles. And you can find him at ryanmitchelbrown.com. That's one L in Mitchell. You can also find him on Instagram. And he is a one-on-one health coach working full-time with people. And his podcast, Decentralized Radio, is a phenomenal show all about quantum and circadian principles. And we talk about so many good things in this episode. I just know you're going to fall in love with this conversation with Ryan Mitchel Brown. Thanks so much for listening. Ryan, welcome to the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. That's a brand new name for the podcast, and I'm super excited to have you here. And thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, we had an IG Live a couple of weeks ago to talk a little bit about leptin and light and things like that. I know you've been diving down that rabbit hole, so we connected on some of the quantum health side, but it'll be fun to kind of dive into a few other topics today, I think, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, for some reason, I've had a lot of followers on Instagram, but for some reason, I just always remember your thumbnail, and I remember you following me, and I think I followed you like years ago. And all of a sudden, we both sort of found ourselves in this circadian and quantum space. And it was like, oh, you got here too. And so I love seeing that. So let's talk about your own personal health journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it's a long one, but I'm glad I have the floor, because it's an interesting story to me, because I never grew up thinking any of this would happen to me. Now, I think that's probably a common thought for people that develop an autoimmune illness or whatever that plagues them, to not think that they'll ever be one of those people. But it was very strange for me, because I had a very stereotypical childhood upbringing, very tight-knit family, no real emotional trauma or abuse or hard times. I was very privileged as a child, had many friends, and it all sort of changed for me on the flip of a dime when I was about 13 or 14 years old. My dad got let go from his job. At the time, we were living in central Kansas. And at that point in my life, it's sort of one of those delicate times of development. You're sort of pre-high school, but a lot of hormones are going around. You're, becoming a man or what have you. And we had to move states. And that really irked me emotionally, just having to start over at such a critical age of development. I mean, you sort of have your friend group developed, you're going into high school, and I had to start completely over. And we moved from central Kansas to Salt Lake City, Utah, which to me was a culture shock, just, going into LDS Mormon country and not really having any background in that sort of realm. And so it was interesting to navigate. And I sort of went from being a very extroverted, outgoing person to more introverted, not knowing how to interact with people, just because there was that lack of commonality. And when I really look at my story specifically, a lot of my problems developed around this time. Now, as far as like lifestyle goes, I mean, I feel like I was one of the last generations to really spend lots of time outside. It was sort of like early social media time. Video games were present, but I spent tons of my childhood outside. And I actually think that has a lot to do with why I rarely got sick. I never was a kid with recurrent ear infection growing up. I mean, never had any health issues, hardly ever. Rarely missed school except for when I could convince my mom that I was sick, even though I wasn't. So it was kind of a rare occurrence. So I started developing these anxieties after we moved. And I think this is where, for my story, it's pertinent because it's the development of what I think is chronic psychological stress. And as we'll kind of get into later in the podcast, I found working with clients, as I'm sure you have as well, you see patterns among clients, maybe with similar or different conditions, but psychological stressors seem to pan across a lot of disease states. And we can address stress in many different ways. You talk about circadian rhythms a ton ad nauseum, and that's very important for proper psychological health and neurotransmitter use and things like that, as well as, proper diet and things. But one thing that I don't think gets discussed as much as maybe it deserves in our space, maybe it gets thrown under the rug of importance under some of these other things, is those important developmental times during one's life when you're creating these branches of yourself that develop your personality and being. And so when I had this move, I think a lot of that was damaged, and I just didn't know how to go about being me. And so I sort of developed a persona of what I thought other people would want me to be because of this new environment. Just like, I mean, Utah's a bubble. If people have not been there, it's a very different place. I feel very strange every time I leave because the people are just different. And it's not that they're bad people here. They're very nice. It's just sort of a different sort of community. And throughout high school, I really struggled with this. I struggled with forming really meaningful relationships. I felt very isolated. And I think loneliness is one of the biggest killers that's just not discussed. I talked about this with Terry Walls a little bit, just offhand a few times, about just lack of community and lack of feeling like you belong. And so this really plagued me. And then in my senior year of high school, things were kind of turning around. Started getting some friends, got my first real first girlfriend. And things were going pretty great. And then that, eventually ended. And that breakup really sort of stirred a lot of these emotions that I think I had finally felt like I overcome once again. And I sort of looked at myself in the mirror and I didn't really know who I was. And so I thought, what can I do to be happier? And I started thinking about, well, I have a few things under my control in this universe, and that is my health, which sort of came up first. And that's when I started developing, unbeknownst to me, eating disorder tendencies of sort of going online, learning about sort of bro fitness, of counting macros and sort of gym routines. And this was all under the guise of me trying to actually be healthier and better myself and empower myself in a position that I had not felt before, especially with sort of that loneliness. And I just went completely the wrong way, because when you live in a world where at that time the rate of metabolic syndrome was probably lower, it still was quite high, I'd imagine, in the mid 2010s. But a lot of the fitness videos online are about losing weight or losing fat, or in the bodybuilding community, cutting. And so in my mind, I was like, well, if I want to get big and swole, first I need to cut like everyone else. For my case, that simply was not true. I've always been a slender dude. I ran track in high school, never dealt with weight issues. So not exactly the right mentality to take, but I did. And then sort of overnight, without me knowing it, I had lost probably 50 pounds in probably less than a year. So this was like freshman year of high school, second semester. So from about January to about June, I probably lost like 40, 50 pounds. And then midsummer, all of a sudden I realize I get on the scale and I'm 88 pounds. And so I know inherently there's something wrong, but I'm so psychologically in this mentality of fear around physique, body dysmorphia now, that I was afraid of the right way to restore weight, because I knew I needed to, but the way to go about it, I was afraid of doing it the wrong way. And I think you see this in all realms of health and wellness. I see this a lot with autoimmune patients who, they want to get better, they want to do all the things, but they're scared of making a mistake. And so I had to eventually become okay with the idea of not having the perfect recovery. And I certainly didn't, but it took me a good year and a half, 2 years to really restore to a quote normal BMI, normal weight. And this came pretty much from working with centralized registered dietitians, telling me to, eat carbs because carbs are energy and all these things. And when I restored my weight, I had the false impression that all of my problems that I developed at a low weight, such as fatigue issues, just like really fatigue and like brain fog and just like inability to like focus throughout the day. I had this false perception that if I just gained weight, all of that would return and I would be the person I was prior to this sort of downfall. But what I noticed was I was once again a normal looking individual, but I never felt the same. And this continued for about 5 years. So this time about 19, 20, living in Los Angeles at the time, sort of pursuing videography stuff and video editing and freelancing. And for several years, I just sort of maintained this cycle of overexercise and restrictive eating patterns where I would sort of binge and then restrict and then binge and then restrict. But if I went to the doctor about it, they really wouldn't bring it up because I looked normal. So it wasn't really a huge concern to them. But when I was 23 in 2019, I started developing neuropathic symptoms in my hands, which quickly spread to pretty much my entire body within the span of about a month and a half from July to August. And that's when I realized that maybe the behaviors I've been engaging in were the problem. And so eventually I got diagnosed with a autoimmune condition called TSHES, small fiber neuropathy. TSHES is just an autoimmune antibody. Didn't really tell me anything about what was going on, but I highly suspected it had to do with various eating disorder behaviors over a number of years. And what would sort of follow after that would be, lots of gamuts of testing, eventually stopping going to centralized doctors, going into functional medicine, finding a lot of failures within functional medicine, not getting better there either. And it was definitely another journey after that. But one of the things that I think was not a concern to me at the time, but I really should have paid attention to, was when I was trying to address my autoimmune symptoms. I was doing all the fancy things that you and other people here talk about on the show, probably like working on, correct dieting. I found paleo, I found animal-based, found carnivore, keto, all that stuff. Did all the things. And it did take me a decent ways, but I would plateau sort of again and again. And it wasn't until really 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago that I sort of reminisced on a lot of the psychological stress that I was under for probably the prior 10 years of my life and never really addressed. I just sort of continued stressful spiral thinking in different patterns. And it wasn't really until I addressed those things that I actually think my nervous system calmed down to the nth degree. And so that's why I wanted to come on and talk about the importance of addressing not just the metaphysical, but also the psychological, because you can't control a lot of things with what you do throughout the day, what you eat, how you sleep, what light you see, when you see it. But if you're living with traumatic experiences, while I think you can get quite far doing a lot of these modalities, I think it behooves everyone to address their trauma, whether that is through psychological processing like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, because it's sort of an untouched area of this side of things. We talk a lot about brain inflammation as I think a root cause of a lot of mental health issues, but I think sometimes, and you notice this when you work with clients or you meet other people, that sometimes they're doing all the right things, and the real enemy is the one inside their head that keeps telling them they can't achieve something, or they keeps them in a spiral. And I'm sure that's something you've seen as well. So that's kind of my story. I cut it down a little bit. There were a few other details in there that were a little like, unnecessary, but that's sort of the even keel.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for coming on and talking so openly about the things that you experienced. And, we often think of eating disorders as perhaps in, more of a female issue, but we see it in males too. Jonathan Shane is another nutritional therapy practitioner who talked about his eating disorder as well. And it can be challenging. And I feel that one of the theme that kind of I extrapolated from this that I think so many people, so many of my clients I see it with, and my followers online, this idea of being scared of making a mistake. And so in my welcome call, my blood sugar mastery coaching program, I talk about taking imperfect action. I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'm an Enneagram 1. We're like the improvers. Like everything always needs to be better than it is. Like, are you an Enneagram? Do you know the Enneagram?
Oh yeah, I'm on there. I'm on that spectrum so hard.
Yeah. So so it's something that I also struggle with as well. And it can show up in different ways, and it can be really insidious. It could just look like inaction. It can look like a lot of researching and a lot of constantly learning, but never taking action. And so that's why I encourage my students to take imperfect action. There is no such thing as a perfect plate of food. There's no such thing as a perfect amount of time outside. There's no such thing as a perfect workout. And so it can be really hard to get over this hurdle if we're so afraid that what we do isn't going to be right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know a lot of people, and we're probably similar, that to a degree live by our calendar just because it keeps us
100%.
focused. But I spoke to Anthony Gustin about this not too long ago, about when you're on our side of the lens, and we're educating, and we're also constantly trying to learn and improve for our own sake, not just our clients or whatever message we're trying to get out there. There are times where like we need to accept that it's okay that we don't need to be learning right now. And I think it's hard when, especially on the patient side too, when you're in the heat of the disease or of whatever situation you're in, that you feel like you constantly need to be doing, when I found truthfully the biggest needle movers have almost been what I've taken away rather than what I've added. So like light is a very simple example of like, getting sunlight is fantastic, but it's like removing artificial light is just as important as getting sunlight. And so the other thing too is like, along my journey, my healing was not even close to linear. There were months in a row where I actually went backwards while still doing the entirely same routine. And what I think held me back from making progress was I was so anal about doing everything perfectly at the perfect times that it created an unnecessary psychological stressor that was driving up cortisol and adrenaline and just keeping me in this state of fight or flight. And I think it's really, to be honest with you, I think the physical stuff's the easiest thing to tackle. Like the you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. The things in between your ears for everybody are the freaking toughest to work through. And I've actually had like multiple conversations just today with clients for the exact same thing of just like trying to be okay with not being okay. And the first step to healing for me was, I actually don't like the word radical acceptance, even though I can't think of a better one for it. And it's true, but it's the radical acceptance of being in the situation you're in. And the hardest part for me was I had to sort of convince myself that even if this was as good as it got, meaning when I still had some symptoms and I sort of hit my plateau, that I could still find joy in life and in doing and in being who I was. And also the other fear, which a lot of people I think confront along their journey, is they in the beginning really want to be the person they were before. And everyone goes through a period of grieving who develops an illness for the person they were prior. But to truthfully get through it, you can never go back to being that person, because that person was the one that led you to the situation you're in. And so when I tell people that the goal is to develop the next best version of you, it's not to say that we're not going to be taking pieces of your personality along the way, but you'll never view the lens of your life in the same light that you did prior to developing whatever you're dealing with. And so it's really important to address these psychological roadblocks, because if you don't, you very easily get caught up either in indecision, like you were saying, or frankly, just stressing yourself out and not letting the modalities that you're implementing actually do their full goodness for you.
Oh my gosh, so many good things here. I just want to highlight a couple of them. That if something is increasing your stress, this like decision fatigue that we get, or like in, what is that? Like in, we have so many choices that we can't make a decision.
Indecisiveness, yeah.
Yeah. And something, or if something's increasing our stress because we're like, well, I have to get this done and this has to be perfect or whatever. Arguably, if something is increasing your stress, it may not be better for your health. So you said taking things out of the things that are impacting us, taking things out can be more impactful sometimes than some of the things we add in. This is something I heard from my good friend Amanda Kuda. She's a sobriety coach, and about getting to like up leveling your life and understanding that alcohol is not only addictive, but it's getting in the way of you showing up as your best self. And she talks about in her story that she was doing all the, retreats and journaling and meditation and working with all these people and doing all these classes. And she realized that at the end of the day, it was about what she was, not what she could put in, but what she could take out that was really going to make the most difference for her. And so the idea that you said, yes, taking out blue light is just as important as getting the right thing. And sometimes we have these habits, and this is where we have to take a really hard look at ourselves, but also then find what actually works. So one of the things that I'll share that I struggle with is scrolling on my phone. I am, and especially now that I've gone through divorce, I'm living alone right now, and craving social connection. You mentioned this loneliness epidemic, and I'm really feeling that lately as well, and how much of a toll it takes. Like, I look at my HRV score, which is a measure of stress resiliency, but my friend Molly Eastman, the sleep expert, she calls it a joy score. My HRV has been garbage. It will not go up to where it was post like pre-divorce. And I'm understanding that, like, instead of stressing out trying to get this metric up, it's like just understanding that being okay with not being okay. Like, I have to be okay that I'm in this, on this stage of my journey right now, and embrace the hard and embrace the contrast that I'm getting from this situation. So taking things out, getting like real with yourself about, I'm sure we can all probably think of like, what is one thing that we know is not doing us any favors and is holding us back? Is it that cheat day that you have? Is it the, my habit of coming home and, flipping on the TV? Or for me, it's Instagram. So I tried to do this thing like no phone in my bed. I tried to use my Instagram following to hold me accountable. I tried to have an accountability buddy. What I've found is that nothing works better than an app to take me off of it. So I've been using App Block, not affiliated. There's also one called Opal, which I'm trying. So, and I'm paying for these apps because they're helping. And so it's like, okay, this is helping me get off. Now I just need to move the timer early and earlier so I can have more space. And I feel finally like I've gotten some sort of control over this situation where it's not controlling me. Like, it doesn't feel good to be controlled by something a lot, outside of us. And then you brought up the point, like, kind of loving yourself along this journey. We hear all the time, we can't heal a body we hate. And so it can be so challenging to be in this state of, this is where I'm at now. There's things about my health that don't feel good, but can I be grateful for where I am? And I struggle with this in that area. Also with my business, I was just told right before this call, I was on a meeting with someone who, works for me. And this lovely person was like, Danny, you are just constantly focused on what's not enough, what's not good enough, what you haven't done yet. And you're just like, I hate to be, blunt with you, but you're not going to get to where you want to be if you don't start finding more gratitude. I was like, okay. So this is a journey that I hope, you as the listeners know that Ryan and I are probably still on. I am certainly still on myself, and it's not easy, but it goes a long way. So for me, I'm thinking about, okay, now I'm tasked with this. Like I need to be grateful. Like when can I add this into my day? Well, maybe we want to stack it with a habit we already have, like going out and seeing the sunshine. Every time I'm outside, can I bring gratitude to that moment? So, Ben Azadi, we were just talking about him before this
Yeah.
call.
Vitamin
Vitamin
G.
G. Yes. Yeah.
It's so funny because I relate to everything you just said, and it's interesting because I think if you are a follower of anyone that does anything similar to what we do online, or just anyone that is an online like quote influence, they've all gone through this, are currently going through it, will go through it more than one time, and there's constant reinvention going on in everyone's lives. And so to look at anyone and say that they've figured it out, they're still figuring certain things out. Like everyone's got something that they're working on. I struggle with the phone thing just like you. Sort of the rule that I use for myself is I only answer messages / scroll during the daytime on my phone anyways, outside. So I'll force, that's how I get some extra light in. And then
Smart.
pretty much at night, I'm cut off at like 6:30. I turn my phone completely off. No one can reach me, not my grandma, not my mom, not my brother. And
Wow.
that's sort of how
Well
I've been able
done.
to circumvent it, but it's not easy. Like I still like, there are days where it's like all I want to do is just like death scroll and just like watch something. And so that's just a fight that
Yeah.
everyone has to deal with, and it's very real. And it's so interesting because my entire life, I think one of the things that I fought, and I think this is pretty common, um, more common today than maybe ever before, is that there's a need to be something of importance, whether that is an influencer or whether that is, for me, that was always like acting and comedy and like needing to be seen. And truthfully, that was me just using it as a coping mechanism to hide the pain that I felt. Was like my sort of my shield was like through humor. And that was but one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, and I'll tell everybody this, is like getting sick with both having anorexia and having autoimmune disease were two of the greatest things that ever happened to me, even though during the time and even in some retrospect, I hate thinking about it, because it taught me more about myself faster than I think I ever could have learned, or maybe ever would have learned in a lifetime, because these things really test you in a way that force you to slow down. And sometimes you have to get hit by a boulder if you expect to climb a mountain, because there's just, especially when you're online, there's like this grind culture. And I've always been obsessed with the idea of identity. And I think that's sort of what you have to sell online, is like a message or a persona or a character. And I really got sick of chasing that. And I think part of the reason I did get sick was the constant need for that. I think it really dragged me down. And so my only goal in life anymore is to just like be human, which means a bunch of different things. But I find joy in some of the most simple pleasures. Like we went camping all last week with my girlfriend's family, and that was the most blissful time of my life. And we literally just like sat outside in the dirt. We went like paddle boarding and stuff on the reservoir, but we were completely immersed in nature. My phone was off like 24/7 the entire week, pretty much, except for like, I think when I'd post every other day, I'd just log on and then log
Amazing.
off. And sometimes you just need to take a break. And I actually ran into this with a client recently who lost their job, and they were asking me, they're going through all this stuff physically, now mentally with stress. And I sat them down and I was like, you know, if you're not in financial straits, and you don't need to like rush and get any job you can right now, I would sincerely take a break. And what he did was he went on a road trip with his brother for a couple days, like immediately after losing his job. And he said it was the most like freeing thing he had done for himself in years. So sometimes the best step forward is the step you take back. And that goes for every realm of your well-being. Like it's super important.
So well said, and such important points. This feels like so many of the topics that come up on my coaching calls. And I was just last night in yoga having this download that like I need people to see what that's like what it is to work with someone. I talk about the how-tos, but there's this whole mental game behind it. And there's this whole, like, we get stuck with so many things, or just maybe we just don't know the next move to take. It's like, I know all the things to do maybe, but it's like, which one is most important, or what's the most important to take out? And what I found, Ryan, which I think, I'm sure you come across this with your clients, it's that we're so afraid to stop doing something. That this came up in my coaching, where I have a client, she's got so much stress. She thinks she's living in mold. Her blood sugar keeps crashing. Her cortisol, stress hormones are super out of whack. And she was telling me that she was kind of asking me where she could fit in her workout in the morning, because I said I want her to eat first before she works out. And she's like, and I'm like, what kind of workouts are you doing? And I was just curious, because I'm like, wow, it sounds like she's got a really high stress load. And she's like, well, I'm doing this like really heavy lifting, really intense HIIT workouts. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so it's like, she doesn't know. I'm saying, oh my gosh, because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy we discovered this, because she is doing something. Her body has no more room for any extra stress. And she is pouring a quote healthy stressor on top. But a healthy stressor, if you have a twisted ankle, I wouldn't say, Ryan, you should be working out right now. You should go for a walk because walking is good for you. No, you can't do it right now because your ankle's, twisted. Like, it needs to heal. So when I gave her, quote, permission to stop these workouts, she just started crying on the coaching call. She's like, oh my God, I don't know why I'm getting so upset right now. I guess I just feel like I can't stop. Like, I can't take out the healthy habits. If I'm not doing well right now, how can I stop working out? Because working out is so good for you. So I so understand where her mind is, but it's like, we also need to remember that certain things are stressors. And if your stress bucket is so overflowing with all different things, from no matter what it is, like maybe your work environment, maybe you are going through a divorce or a breakup, or you're having issues with your aging parents, or your kid is going through something stressful. We have to realize that we can't do the same exact thing every single day. And I think that people are looking for, what is the one diet? What is the one workout routine? What is the one thing? And it's like, we have to be able to flex and flow and change, and remember that nature has cycles and rhythms. And so if we look back to nature, there's hot and cold, there's feast and famine, there's sunlight, there's darkness. So in embracing the fact that our days are going to look different, and our months are going to look different depending on the season we're in. Are we in a season of intense chronic stress and chronic health issues? Our days are going to look really different if we're in this healing phase than if we're in a I'm healthy, I healed. We're in a maintenance phase, right? Do you see that too?
Oh man, I see it a lot. And actually, I'll tell a quick story about just
Yeah.
myself that happened recently as well. But that's such a big part, and I actually really struggled with that initially when I developed autoimmune symptoms, because I really
Yeah.
wanted to maintain the amount of exercise that I was doing, which was already inappropriate. I was going to the gym like 2.5, 3 hours every day of the week,
Yeah.
and lifting as heavy as I could. Which for myself, I was never a big guy, so I never was like this big muscly like Chris Hemsworth guy. But I'd never take breaks in between sets, and so actually having to pull that back was a super tough psychological like change for me. But like I said, it's like when your bucket's full, like you mentioned, it's not so much, you're filling it up faster than you can empty it. And that's pretty much the case with everyone that has, once you develop a physical ailment, like it's game over, like your bucket's full, like there's no question about it. And so rest and restoration are super critical. But one thing that happened to me recently, which really gave me sort of imposter syndrome, was about 2.5, 3 months ago. Man, maybe not even that long ago. I think it was March 16th. Yeah, that's right. I had appendicitis. I had an appendix attack, and my appendix almost burst. I fainted. So started developing abdominal pain on like a Thursday. I had like done, I thought what it was I did a very intense ab workout, and then I drank a kombucha And then I just started getting stomach pain, like in my stomach. I was like, great, like the kombucha got me or whatever. And then this pain just sort of intensified over the next day or so. By Friday, I started developing some like chills and not a fever, but just I felt sick now, which wasn't the same as a tummy ache because sometimes I'll drink too much bubbly water and it'll get to me sort of down there with too much like CO2. But this was different, and everyone around me was making fun of me, just like calling me a baby for like, I was literally walking around with like a blanket on because I just felt sick and my tummy hurt. But I never guessed it was my appendix because it was in the right quadrant, but it was higher than where your appendix is supposed to be. But that night around 2 a.m., I woke up to pee, which is already super abnormal for me. I never do that. Just, I haven't in like literally a year since I started implementing just proper light exposure, never wake up to pee. And so I did. And I walk over to the bathroom and I'm just like in intense stabbing pain. And I'm standing there, doing my business. And I start losing my eyesight. And then I start losing my hearing. And so in my head, I'm like, I'm fainting. And so I'm like, I got to finish this. And then I do my best to make it out of the bathroom before fainting. I lay down on the floor and actually pass out. My girlfriend finds me in the hallway of our basement. And I'm just laying there. I'd come back to probably after a minute or so, but I just knew, I was like, I hope someone finds me or I'll just lay here till morning. And she convinces me to go to the ER and they do a CT and they find that my appendix either already blew up or is about to because they couldn't tell based on all the inflammation. So long story short, they get it out. I'm good. They send me home. I'm not in like tons of crazy antibiotics or anything, which is great. Didn't have to stay in the hospital for a week, which I was very thankful for. But it really sent me through this semi-spiral of like, why did that happen to someone that's doing, like, I was feeling great. Like it just sort of came out of nowhere. Like, am I an imposter? Because like this shouldn't happen to someone that's on it. And what I realized was, I mean, could be a number of factors. I mean, there's a lot of things with like lymphatic flow that goes into areas of tissue down there as well. But I really think like I was pushing myself so hard the last year of like, just like upping client work and like developing guides and like trying to like plan events and like do just scale things and just build business and like make videos. I think I was falling into the same patterns that were part of the problem for why I got sick in the first place. And my body was simply responding to that. And so over the 6 weeks of recovery that I had, where I was pretty limited as far as like what I could lift and do, like after a week, you're pretty normal, but you're not supposed to lift above 15 pounds for about 6 weeks. I really took that time to simply decompress and just like reevaluate what is meaningful in my life. And it sort of made me realize that it's like, success doesn't have to mean a specific number or achievement. Success can simply be happiness and, like you mentioned, gratitude. And so one thing that I think we've just forgotten as a society is that we have all these signals around us telling us about our environment, our state of well-being, and we just don't know how to read them anymore. We sort of live in an artificial zoo. We're sort of zoo animals in our own gilded cage. And so when you remove the noise and you really take time to listen to your body, the answers are actually abundantly clear. That's why I think it's Ben Azai that says like your symptoms are a gift. And it really is true because you don't have something happen to you for no reason. And I think we just need to remove that stigma, which I'm tying this back to mental health. I'm working away on this wheel, but there's been a normalization of mental health disorders as either hereditary or this is just how you are because you're neurodivergent. And I'm not saying that any of these things make you inherently bad or are inherently bad to be ADHD or on the spectrum or whatever. I've had those diagnoses, but it should make you think, is this normal just because it's common? And I always use the example of my mother who just retired from being a first grade teacher for 34 years. Over her 34 years, we had many discussions of her class, how annoying they were, just pestered, like difficult students. And she noticed over the last 10, 15 years that the rates of chronic mental health conditions in children, like 6, 7 years old, are insanely high compared to when she began teaching in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, kids with crippling anxiety, ADHD, autism, all these things. She's seeing them at much higher rates. And as a teacher, she's actually trained to sort of point some of these things out in case parents haven't picked them up, so that she can alert the proper people to help handle those and help those kids get the proper care. And one thing we discussed is just like our environment has shifted so much in 34 years, with screens, with non-native EMFs, with more rates of just like other chronic diseases in children, that I don't look at mental health in the same lens that I did when I first was dealing with depression, anxiety with anorexia. And I sort of look at my environment at the time of development. And I can tell you that I was doing exactly opposite of everything that I do now. I was pretty mindful of what I ate because I was in sort of the fitness community. So I wasn't eating like junk food or ultra processed food. Definitely wasn't eating like probably the highest quality food either. I was definitely eating like a lot of, oatmeal and packaged stuff because I was a poor college student. But I also never went outside. I had immense amounts of screen time for my job and in school, especially like technology and learning now is like almost intertwined. There are schools that are like 50-50 teacher one-on-one and then screen time for kids now. And everything was just off. And so one of the major things that I think helped me through that was spending more time in a natural environment and like being outside and like on the weekends, getting away from the house, getting away from screens. And so when I look at mental health now, I don't look at it as a disease of heredity or a disease of environment or a disease of bad play or wrong place, wrong time, or horrible friends, which those things contribute. But it's sort of everything all at once, all the time. And that's how you got to view pretty much every situation, because your body's never doing anything in isolation. Everything's affecting everything all the time. And so that's why, like you mentioned mold earlier, that's like a hot topic in the community right now. I think everyone thinks they have Sears, which, a lot of people probably do have Sears, but it's one of those things where there's so much nuance to even mold that, I mean, there's a whole redox component that no one likes to talk about in the shoemaker community. So there's just, you can't look at anything black and white. And that's the only gripe I've ever developed with the functional side of things, as well as they fall into the same myopia that centralized systems do as well.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit more about, like, you've been through mental health issues, autoimmunity, and you said that you went the functional route. And I think what people are finding, myself included, is that there are gaps in functional medicine. We're not throwing any practitioners under the bus. We're just saying that, like, I almost think that our environment has become so artificial, so disconnected from nature, that we need more than what they can offer now, because maybe our environments were a little less harmful for our bodies, years ago, like when your mom started teaching. I was a speech therapist before I did this, and I saw the exact same thing. We just see these issues getting worse and worse, and the wait lists for kids to get services are just astronomical, and then you have people like me leaving the field. But it's, I wanted to get into nutrition with kids on the spectrum, and kids with language delays and cognitive issues, because I just saw so much help for that. But yeah, the environment is a huge player. So talking about gaps in functional medicine, what are you seeing, and what are you seeing that is needed?
Well, as someone who can prescribe functional testing, but has also spent literally tens of thousands of dollars on my own functional testing with limited results for several years, it's not that I think that functional medicine is invaluable, but it can fall into the same pitfalls that conventional medicine does with a pill for an ill. It's just a supplement for an ill instead of a pill. And the one gripe that every client that I've ever had talk to me, including myself as a former patient, as someone that went through this, is one gripe I have with a lot of the way it works is you go see someone. They're great listeners. Usually they'll listen to your whole story. They're very caring most of the time, had great experiences with people, but then they sort of run through the routine too, like of what a doctor would do, is like, they'll give you testing. Maybe it's testing you've never heard of. Could be an organic acid test, could be a Nutri-Eval, could be a mycotoxin assessment or hair tissue analysis, which can be valuable. But then they usually get a sheet that sort of explains what to do. So sometimes there isn't as much free thinking as you would think there is in a practitioner setting, because a lot of the answers, like they'll like the lab will actually send you sort of the protocol for XYZ. And so it sort of follows into the same issue of standard of care, only this is a alternative standard of care. And don't get me wrong, like plenty of people have been helped by it. I was certainly helped to a certain degree, but it really frustrated me because I noticed the patterns and I was like, this isn't much different other than my insurance just didn't cover it this time. And then the other thing too that I often find is like usually I would walk away with like tons of supplements and then I never was given an explanation of what each supplement was meant to be doing. And so as a minimalist with supplements, if I ever use them or suggest them, it's usually, it needs to have some damn good evidence and I need to explain like what pathway I'm trying to use this for, because I think it's the duty of a practitioner to educate the patient for their own health, not just give them an answer, which some people maybe only want. But my goal is mainly education for patients so that they can, have the skill to determine things for themselves in the future, because you're not going to be problemless forever. But those are sort of the main pitfalls that I sort of just felt let down in.
Did you see them asking about, your time spent in nature, how much you're outside?
No,
Are you blocking blue light?
I don't think I was ever asked any of that. And granted, this was this was before I think the circadian stuff was even, it's decently popular now. It's still relatively unknown for the majority. Yeah. But no, not once was that ever talked about. In fact, if I even remember looking at a lot of the practitioners that I met with, they clearly didn't spend a lot of time in nature either, because they were like pale as ghosts. And I don't know. It was just sort of like I've always been sort of the skeptical type, which has benefited me and not benefited me, because of just, you got to be a little open to new ideas if you want to make improvement. But I sort of always would see someone and I'm like, are you even doing what you preach? And that always sort of irked me in the wrong ways. And I don't think you need to quote practice what you preach to be knowledgeable, but it certainly helps with perception and, other people following in your footsteps. So that's sort of the gripe I have. I think functional medicine can be equally as bad as conventional medicine in certain scenarios. And that's why I think, truthfully, at the end of the day, even if you go through these routes, to some degree, you're going to be having to teach yourself stuff, because no one's going to give you all the answers. And that was the letdown for me, was like, in the end, I almost did all the work anyways, just with less money in my pocket. And so that's what I usually tell people that I meet with, is like, I don't do nothing for you other than bestow knowledge. You do all the work. I don't heal nobody. You do that yourself. And so that was like a big realization for me, because I think a lot of people that enter the alternative space are like, I just want an answer and a what to do. And health doesn't work. It's not an A to B like that.
Yeah, for sure. I just keep agreeing so much with everything you're saying. I see tons of clients who come to me and we do a supplement protocol consultation when they sign up for blood sugar mastery. And they're like, well, I'm already on so many supplements. I'm like, we're going to get you off of some of those. Don't worry. Because I like that idea of being a supplement minimalist, because if you find yourself taking boatloads of supplements and you see a huge change from it because maybe you're on a protocol and it's very effective and it's working, great. But I have been in the situation where I've taken boatloads of supplements and not felt a damn thing.
That's me every time.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So yeah. And that's why with my clients, I take them off of so many supplements, or what I do is I encourage them to pause it, to press pause. Let's pause this. Let's see if you notice a difference, or if you don't notice a difference whatsoever. And I'm not saying you're going to notice a difference with every supplement. I, for example, love Beam Minerals, and I feel mildly energized by it. I don't really feel it that much, but I have clients who are like, it's game changing for them, because everyone has these different needs and deficiencies. I know all the good that it's doing. So for me, that's one that's like non-negotiable. I mean, the fulvic mineral changes charge once it gets inside your cells. And amazing stuff. So I'm like sold. Yes, love that. But I don't feel it so much. So I'm not saying you're going to feel every supplement you take, but my route with my clients is really prioritizing digestive supplements to help them break
Oh yeah.
down food so that they can actually extract the nutrients from the food that they're getting. And then that makes so much of a difference that they do feel, because imagine you're lowering inflammation, you're getting more nutrients out of every bite of food. That's primarily where I supplement with most of my clients. For blood sugar stuff, we almost there's not really a lot of supplements I give for that. Maybe if they request berberine, okay,
Oh
but
yeah.
it's just not gonna that's not gonna do it. And so like I don't like to have people disillusioned. It's like this is diet, lifestyle, and environment that's gonna move the needle. So let's talk about some things. Let's go into some circadian and quantum biology strategies that you have found to support mental health, because that is, I've noticed a huge change as I'm going through this divorce. Obviously, it's an acute issue with my mental health that I'm experiencing. And I mean, when the sun is out, there is such a difference in my mood and when I'm getting UVA light. So let's go into some of that nuance and share what you found to really move the needle there.
Yeah, I really think for me, and I was extremely skeptical to light all of this light stuff. I remember when I first heard about it from my friend Ryan Carter, who's Live VT on Instagram and other socials. He's really top notch. He's a really interesting guy. But I remember when he was just telling me about it as like a thing to try. This is like probably 2020 or 20, yeah, probably 2020. And he was talking about rounding too. And I was like, I actually remember having conversations with a close friend that was also in the animal-based space. And we were like, man, this grounding stuff sounds kind of silly. It seems like all the studies are funded by grounding people. That's a little weird, isn't it? So I was like totally not sold on like any of this doing anything. But I just sort of like I kind of caught myself because I often like to shoot things down before giving it a shot. So I was like, I'm not gonna get harmed by like seeing sunrise for like a month. And so that was really the first thing I implemented. And at this point, I will let you know, like I was doing pretty good mentally. Um, but I would get in sort of depressive episodes of just like, man, I'm not like at this level I want to be that I'm seeing other people at. And so I'd get really down and spiral into there. But I have not dealt. So I used to wake up and have like the stereotypical, you wake up, you feel groggy, you're not motivated for the day, you don't want to do anything. It takes you like a good hour to wake up. You need coffee to like release any dopamine or something like that. And that was me still. Even though I like felt like I was sleeping pretty good, I just felt up like not wanting to take on the day. And truthfully, seeing sunrise or light close to sunrise, meaning like you're not looking at any artificial light before seeing natural light, truthfully changed everything for me from just a clarity point of view and just a zest for life. I definitely see sunset most days. I can't say that I felt any sort of bump from seeing sunset other than maybe it knocks me out faster. I know for a fact the minute I put on red blue blockers, I'm just like instantly tired. Like I can feel the melatonin coming on and I'm just like going down. But I think really, and this goes back to what we were sort of talking about earlier, the biggest circadian game changer for me from a mental and physical health perspective was the light I took away. So obviously right now I am in a very inoptimal position with a nice light on my face because it's like 96 degrees out and this computer cannot handle it. But I used to sit in front of light like this 24/7, and just the energy throughout the day and just the vibe of my life was at such a low frequency. I was just such a pessimistic like person all the time. And I was super fast to frustration and super quick to anger. And actually the major thing I noticed in my mood after shifting to probably being outside like a good 70% of the day in the summer, um, is I have much better control over my reactions to events. So bad news used to really hit me like a freight train. And now I'll get news of like I got that medical bill for my appendectomy. I thought I was out of the woods and they hit me with like a $2,000 bill or something for my hospital stay. And that would like really torque me off like a year or two ago. And I literally just got it. And I was like, all right, well, we'll figure it out. And that was like it. So the ability to handle events throughout the day that are not planned, which for people with a lot of different mental health conditions, whether it's ADHD or OCD, when things change for those people, they do not do well. changes in the day that are not expected or planned freak them out, and it sends them into at least a spiral for a good minute. That completely went away for me as someone that dealt with that for probably 12 years before doing any of this stuff to a degree. Like I remember in the heat of my anorexia, if something changed during the day, I would literally flip out and cry and just like freak out, and the rest of the day would be ruined. And so it's been really nice to be able to be more flexible and go with the flow. And that's sort of a funny thing to say, because when you're in the health space, you feel like you have to be like this regimented individual. When everything now is just sort of like, just comes naturally. It's like, oh, I get up, I just go outside, I sit out there, drink some water with electrolytes in it, ground for a minute, come back inside, make some food, take the food outside, go eat. And life's just more peaceful and more serene. And so that's sort of the major thing, was really adjusting the light and when I see that light. So for me, sunrise is a non-negotiable. And then I have to be getting, right now I'm sort of challenging myself as far as like how much melanin renovation I can create. I'm trying to see like what I didn't really track it last year. So I'm just seeing like, okay, how much tolerance can I actually have outside? So I'm really pushing to like try and be outside grounded like 80% of the day if I can, which is not an easy task when you live a modern life. But I just want to see if that takes me to another level that maybe I'm still yet to discover. But from a circadian basis, it's actually really easy. I mean, just look outside and you kind of know what to do. When the sun's down, you just turn off the freaking lights. I mean, throw on your red light bulbs. It'll be less disruptive, but it's still not particularly optimal. The number one piece of advice I would give to anybody with a mental health condition, because this seems to be like a pattern, is they have issues sleeping. And a lot of them need the TV on at night to sleep, even though they can't sleep. It's a really funny conundrum, because they're already insomniacs, but if they want to sleep, they feel like they need the TV on to sleep. And almost all of them, when I convince them to take the TV out of their room, or at least turn it off and unplug it at night, they almost always sleep better. Also, removing artificial light, I'm mostly like wearing blue blockers or something, but almost all of them almost have instant improved sleep when they do that. And there's that fear of sort of like what we were talking about earlier, of like, if I don't do something, it'll be horrible, just because you're so used to doing an activity, even if you know it doesn't work. So sometimes you got to take that leap of faith, but that's a big one I've seen, at least from a circadian mental health perspective, around sleep.
Yeah, those are great. And that morning routine is exactly the same morning routine as mine. It's so
Yeah, it's
funny
pretty
to hear.
basic. It's pretty
Yeah,
easy.
it's pretty, and it is. And what I love that you brought up is that it is serene, it is peace, and it is connection. And so I think we were going back to what we said earlier about feeling lonely and feeling isolated. And if you're not where you want to be and with your social connections or your relationship status, what I've found is that connecting with the sun and connecting with nature, it's a daily reminder of that I am made of the same stuff that our stars are made out of. I'm made of star stuff. We're made of the same elements and materials, and this beautiful sun that is giving everything on this planet life, with maybe the exception of these tiny sea creatures that live in the bottom vents, and they're, don't have light, no exposure to light, and
I
whatever they're
wonder if
getting.
they still emit biophotons, though.
Maybe they do, right? So maybe they're emitting light, but this idea that this sun is giving us all life, and it's given all life on earth life. This is the same sun that Jesus looked at, that our ancestors looked at, that the Native Americans. I mean, it's so, I don't know, I just feel so connected to like all these people. I get so emotional every time I talk about this. Just all these people who came before us and who will come after us. And it's just such a beautiful time to just soak in the fact that we are connected and we are all one. So we can't be alone. And it's just such a beautiful, emotional, spiritual journey if you want to take it there too.
Yeah, I think last thing I'll say on that exact note is that one thing that actually brings me peace, which maybe doesn't sound like it would, but it seems to work for me, is I think about our place in the universe, in the vastness of never endingness, and I actually makes me feel more peaceful knowing that I am almost completely insignificant in the grand scheme of time. But also it's like thinking about how lucky you are to even exist on like a dot in the cosmos at this, like you're not even a speck on a dot. in the scheme of space. But there's sort of like this weird balance in my head of like, it's kind of nice knowing that my life, it sounds kind of weird, but it's almost nice knowing that my life almost is meaningless in like the scheme of time. But at the same time, it sort of gives me a little bit of freedom to like not be afraid to share something that may not be received as well as I want it to. But it sort of gives you that freedom of just being able to like be yourself, not having to have that expectation on you. So I don't know.
Yeah. And zooming. Yeah. And it's zooming out. It's zooming out because when we're stressed about something, when we're, fighting for our health and we're so plagued by our symptoms, the world gets so small and it's just us with our symptoms or us with our problems. And it's like, these are my problems. And then we zoom out and we're like, oh, there's, that zooming out can put things a little bit more in perspective. And Ryan, you did mention something earlier about EMDR, and I'm actually doing EMDR, and I had a session just yesterday, and I went through my medical trauma, and I just felt called to share this, that with, I'm not going to go into the whole thing. Maybe I'll do a whole podcast episode on it, but what sort of the messaging that's just came in my mind and that I just kept repeating over and over again. And I was telling my former self, as I'm on the table doing LASIK, which I know messed me up. And so I'm having all sorts of feelings about that. But what I was telling this younger version of Danny is we are safe, we can heal. We are safe, we can heal. We are safe, we can heal. And I just kept saying it over and over and over. And it's like, oh yeah, my body is so freaking capable of healing. And we lose touch with that. We can heal so many things. I'm not saying we can heal everything. To my knowledge, I don't know about healing something like type 1 diabetes. There's certain things, I'm so sorry. It's hard to even like point out one thing, but there's so many things we can heal. And there's so much that we can do to improve our situation, even if we can only bring gratitude, and sitting in that gratitude, thinking of someone uncomplicated who you have this uncomplicated relationship with, who you love, you will just start smiling. You will just start feeling their presence. And it's that joy that you feel, that gratitude, that connection that you feel in that moment, that's yours. You can bring that feeling. You can experience those emotions anytime you want. And that's really what it is. That's what we think, that's what health will bring us. It's like, but are we ever stopping on this journey to be like, wow, I did reach this new level of health? Or are we still on this train of like, well, I need to fix this and this isn't perfect yet, I have to do this? Like, can we ever just stop for a second, myself included? This is directed at me. I have not mastered this, but can we stop for a second and smell the roses and look at the sun and just feel like, God, like I am so damn proud of myself for how much freaking work I've put in, and how far I've come. So yeah,
that's super important. I totally agree.
Yeah. Amazing. So Ryan, tell people where they can find you, how they can work with you, what you offer, and and I'll link everything in the show notes.
Cool. Well, yeah, you can reach out to me kind of anywhere social media wise. I'm most active mostly on Instagram at Ryan Mitchell Brown, just spelled like sort of my name down there in the corner with one L on the Mitchell. That's like the caveat. My parents don't know how to spell Mitchell, so I got cursed with the one L. But yeah, you can also reach out to me on my website, www.ryanmitchellbrown.com. And then I'm just everywhere, like Facebook's the same thing. YouTube, I do a podcast with my friend Tristan called Decentralized Radio, where we host a lot of researchers and people in the field that are, doing cutting edge stuff. Going to a summit about that this week. But those are kind of the main areas.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you didn't share that's on your heart to share with people? Any last words?
I think the main thing I just want to get across to anyone that's dealing with any sort of problem, whether it's mental, physical, or both, is that it's sort of, jumping off of what you said, is that progress can be made as long as you believe in the process and you get out of your own way. You'll often find that the only thing that's truly holding you back is the fear you have of improvement or failure. And if you just try things enough times, one of them is going to work. There's no business person in the world that started out with the $1 billion idea. it usually took them 10 or 12 things. So you got to look at it in the same lens. It's sort of like going to the gym and building muscle or building your solar callus. It takes time and consistency. The only thing that ever fixed anyone was rigorous consistency in behavior. So if you do that, you'll definitely see progress somewhere.
I love that. Thank you so much. Beautiful message. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Ryan.